Welcome to Headlines. This is David Lichtenstein with an hour of Halacha Hashgacha here in the Yeshiva Shalmaila. This week we have a really interesting program, Vegetarianism and Halacha. What's the Halacha Hashgacha? Is it good or is it bad? Are you going against, the mitzvah of basar on Shabbos? What about, the Torah seems to certainly allow basar of karbanis, etc. We will have on for that Rabbi Dovid Bar-Chaim, director of Shiloh in Eretz Yisrael. He's a Dayan, a speaker, Rosh, Bais, Horaah in Yerushalayim. And then we will be speaking about, can you eat in a vegetarian restaurant without a vegan restaurant? That means no eggs, no cheese, no milk, without a hashgacha. We will have Rabbi Schreier, rabbinical coordinator of food service for the OU. We will have Rabbi Schwarcz, the Hamachshir of the IKC, which does give hashgacha on many vegetarian restaurants. We'll be hearing their opinions. And this was a traveler to India asked this question. He said, can I eat in a vegan restaurant of the Jains, or is it a Shiloh? I want to remind all our listeners, all your comments, writing or voicemail, are put onto our website for other people to listen to, even those that stridently disagree with me. That's the way of the Torah. The way of Shas, Bavli, Risham was always a way of discussion, disagreement, right? And from the disagreement comes out a clearer mahalach, respectfully. Before we start, I would like to say of a story. A lot of people listen to Motzei Shabbos. Last week in the parsha, it says that the machlokes of Yaakov and Esav, when he sold him the michra kayim b'charas chali, so the Medrash says, he said, what do you want that for? Like, you really believe in Olam Haba? So Yaakov said, yeah. He says, well, why don't you can have it? And I want to share a story that people have asked me if it's true. And it is true, and I think it's a very interesting story. Around 10 years ago, I had two children learning, one in the Mir and one in seminary, a daughter in seminary. And I went to visit them, and I'm in the lobby of the hotel. And who do I see? Michael Steinhardt. He founded Birthright. Birthright has brought 600,000 young, mostly secular Jews to Israel between, I think, the ages of 18 and 26, and an astounding effect. Many of them have been chayzer b'tshuva. 70% of them said that previously they would have married a guy and afterwards they won't. It's about Jewish identity. But he is supposedly an atheist. And I see him in the lobby, and a thought goes through my mind. A person who's done so much for Klal Yisrael, an atheist. Let me see if I could talk to him a little bit. So I go over to him, I say, Mr. Steinhardt. He turns around. There's a very recognizable handlebar mustache. He says, yes. He says, I envy your share in the world to come because of what you've done for Birthright. And he looks at me and he says, oh, that's very interesting because I don't believe in the world to come. So I looked at him and I had an idea. I said, Mr. Steinhardt, why don't I buy your share in the world to come and I'll give you $100,000. You're a hedge fund manager. You like to do good deals. You think it's worth nothing. I think it's worth a lot. I'll buy it. Here's a check. He looked at me and he said, okay. And I said, let's write it up. And I was carrying with me a real estate alert, and he wrote in the back, I, Michael Steinhardt, sir, the mitzvah Birthright and his share in the world to come to David Lichtenstein for $100,000. I gave him the check. I took the paper. We had a contract. Now, the next morning at breakfast, he comes over to me and he says, you can change your mind. And I said to him, I'll tell you the truth. If you had asked for $1 million, I would have given it to you too. That's what I think it's worth way more. I got a great deal. What was my thought? My thought was, sometimes when they sell it, suddenly they start thinking twice. In fact, I called my wife up that night from the hotel and I said, do you think I did a crazy thing? She said to me, trust me, he'll be thinking about it a lot longer than you. Okay. So I see him 2 years later and he says, David, yeah, you're the fellow. He says, again in Eretz Yisrael, funny. He says, what made you do that? So I said, let me share with you a story that I heard from my father, the Chayim L'Racha. I said, there was a fellow, he lived in Poland. He was poor as could be. He had 4 daughters. He didn't have a dowry. Not having a dowry there was a Shiloh crisis then too, if you didn't have a dowry. And they're getting old, and his wife says, do something. He says, what? He says, there's a tzaddik in Lublin, the chayz of Lublin. Go ask him for a bracha. So his wife mutchered him. So one day he goes, packs up his bags, travels 3 weeks to Lublin. He gets to Lublin, comes into the Holy Chayza, he starts crying. He says, I have 4 daughters, they're getting older, I have no money to marry them. Chayza puts his hand in his waistband, takes out a ruble, and flips it to the guy. The guy catches it, he looks at it, and he says, Rebbe, you're making lutzanis for me? A ruble? To marry off my daughters? I need 50,000 ruble. The Chayza looks at him and he says, take this ruble, the first business deal that somebody offers you, do it. And Rabbi Shalom Betelfen. This guy takes the ruble, he leaves, and he says, my wife, this is what happens when you listen to women. And he starts traveling home, and on the way he sees an inn. And what does a Yid B'tzar do? He goes into the inn, and he starts buying schnapps. He gets a little bit stoned, right? He gets high on schnapps. He's trying to drink away his pain. We know about that too. And a few Shababniks come in. These Levitic Schreier, young Jewish guys, wealthy fellows. And they see like a real Hamish guy sitting by the bar drinking. So they go over to him, they say, oh, Rabbi, Shalom Aleichem, what are you doing here? He says, I'm passing through. And then he remembers the Chayzer. He says, for business. So they said, oh, business, that's funny. We'll love to do business with you. He said, I have a big factory if you want to buy it. Manufactures compost or whatever they use then in Poland. How much do you have? So he puts his hand in his pocket. He says, I have 1 ruble. So the richest guy of the group says, a ruble. He starts laughing. He says, listen, ruble, there's nothing I have a ruble. I have factories, I have buildings, I have farms, forests, plantations. Oh, he says, I have one thing I have that's worth a ruble, my Olam Haba. So Rebbe said, the first deal. So he says, okay, I'll buy it. They take out a paper. He says, I, Joseph, sold my Olam Haba to this Yidala for a ruble, and he signs. So he goes back home that night, and he says to his wife, he says, you want to hear a funny story that happened? She says, how was your day? She says, I'll tell you a funny story. I was in the bar, and this guy, rubles, I sold him a Olam Haba for a ruble. So she says to him, it seems she was a drop more religious than him. She says, you sold her Olam Haba? What kind of crazy? You can't live with me if you don't have any Olam Haba. Ow, 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 ow! So go buy it back. So he runs back, and he sees this Yidel, and he's now really drunk, and he says to him, listen, you know that little joke we made for Olam Haba for a ruble? Here's 10 ruble, give it back. Give me back the paper. So he opens up one eye, he squints. He's had already a lot of l'chaim. He says, I'm sorry, I can't do it for 10. He says, okay, I'll give you 100. He says, no, I can't do it for 100 either. He says, I'll give you 250. His wife. He says, no. He says, look, no, he goes home. Comes back in. His wife says, no, show me the paper. Says he didn't want to sell it back. He wanted 250. She says, 250? I don't care how much it costs. You're out of here. And it seems that the money in the family was from her side of the family. And this time she takes a broom and she chases him out. He goes back. He says, listen, I'll give you 1,000. He says, I can't. He says, how much do you want? He says, I need 50,000 ruble. He says, 50,000 ruble? What are you, crazy? So he goes back home. This time when he comes home, he finds his underwear, his clothing. It's on the bushes outside the house. So his wife says, you have the paper? He says, no, out. So he goes back and forth. He'll give 5,000, 10,000. The Rebbe said 50,000. The end, the guy gives 50,000 ruble. He gives back the paper. Done deal. He goes home. He marries off all his daughters. Life is wonderful. So a few years later, his wife says to him, you never went to thank the Chayzer for Lublin. So he goes back, and he goes to see the Holy Lublina. Tell him, sometimes you have to tell the good news too. He comes and he tells her, I did the first deal, I made 50,000, and he tells him the story, and I married my daughters, thank you. Chayzer smiles. Chayzer says, let me tell you something. When you bought his Olam Haba for a ruble, it wasn't even worth a shmek tabak. He was ripping you off. It wasn't worth a ruble. It was worthless. But when he bought it back for 50,000 ruble, then he was ripping you off. Because at that time, helping you, a Jew do such a mitzvah. Then it was worth the Rebbe, the Chayza hold his hands high, and it was priceless. At that point, he was getting the better of you. So I told Steinhardt, this is the story that inspired me. And then somebody sent me a paper that he spoke at. He gave a speech someplace, and he said the story differently than the way I remember it. He said, a young man came over to me and offered, I guess then I was young, and offered to buy my share in the world to come, and I sold it to him. He said, because doesn't the Mishnah say, he says, the rabbi says, doesn't the Mishnah say that a person is supposed to serve God not for rewards, not for payments, but only for the purest motives, because service is an end in itself, and that's why I sold him my share in the world to come. You know what? If that's his opinion, then it was Zichig Yeholfen, right? But certainly it's one of the great, mitzvahs in Klal Yisrael, you have to say, is birthright. So let me share a thought on the parsha. I want to talk about Jewish style of investing. So we have two protagonists, Esav and Yaakov. And Esav means osoi. Everything's prepared, complete. He came out, he was full of hair, he looked like an adult, he was ready to rock and roll. Esav was complete. Yaakov, when we see Yaakov in the whole parsha, it talks about Raglayim. Vayisa Yaakov Raglov. Vaniyasnala Leiti, Leregel Hamlacha, Ragle Hayaladim. It's walking and traveling. When you look at the parsha, Esav, everything comes to him easily. Yaakov, what does he say? Zeli esrim shana beveisecha avadaticha. I worked so hard. Kerech balayla. I worked through snow, ice. Vatidat shtasim einai. I wasn't able to sleep. The Medrash says that when Esav came to Yaakov by the Nizid Hadasha, Esav says, the whole world is grabbing food and you're busy cooking. So Yaakov says to him, if you're not willing to work for the future, how are you going to get rewarded at the end? So Esav looks at him and he says, you believe in this Eilam Haba stuff? You think that there'll be Tchias HaMesim, there'll be Eilam Haba? So Yaakov said, if that's what you believe, if that's your attitude, sell me your Bechira. If you don't believe there's a future world, sell me your Bechira. There's something called instant gratification and delayed gratification. Instant tea. Did you see the ad? Lose 7 pounds in 7 days. What does that mean? No work necessary. Quick fix. Silver bullet. Tricks. One simple trick to lose a lot of weight. I remember I used to write a letter. Then FedEx came. Then no fax. You get it faster. Then email. For people who email isn't enough, there's instant messaging. Amazon, they came out with 2-day delivery. Then they said you could have next day delivery. Now they have 1 hour delivery in New York City for Amazon. Instant gratification. Let's have an instant diploma, instant Hamachshir, instant gratification, instant tea, instant coffee, 5-minute breakfast at McDonald's. That's one way of looking at life, right? And there's another way of looking at life is, if the barrier levels of entry are so easy, well, guess what? It's really going to erode opportunity. It's really going to erode reward. And that's called delayed gratification. You know what that means? No, you really can't lose 7 pounds in 7 days. And there really is no trick. It's about changing your lifestyle, making real... there's no instant money. There's no instant learning. There's no instant Talmud Chacham. None of these things. It's very glossy and sound. It doesn't really work that way. So what's the Jewish way? It says, Yaakov says to Rachel, to Lavan, right? Evodcha sheva shanim b'Rachel bit karsana. And what does the Torah say? Vayu b'ye'enav ki yamim achadim. It was so fast. It was like 1 day all this work. And everybody was. Usually when you're waiting for something, it feels like it goes forever. It doesn't go quickly. But you see, there's two attitudes here. One attitude is the work is bad. I want it. I'm working because I want it. And there's another attitude is, in other words, Esav wants to be there. Yaakov understands that getting there is the tachlis. The whole purpose of Olam Hazeh is just getting there. It's the work. They say that the Vilna Gaon, he cried before he died. He said, in this world, every moment of work was a mitzvah, was achieving something, attaining towards a goal. He said, in Olam Haba, you're there. There's nothing else to do. There's no more work. Yaakov understands getting there is the joy. Esav wants to be there. If somebody understands that getting there is the joy, so the entire journey is all joyous. Vayiyu be'enav ki yamim achadim. If the journey is the purpose, if you're going to Africa for a safari, and it's a 2-week safari, you're not each one of those 14 days, it's the 14 days. That's the purpose. That's the tachlis. It's the 14 days of the safari. It's not a goal to get to the city where you're arriving at. So the Yiddish way is, we understand that good things, instant is worthless. Good things really take a long time, and that journey is important and valuable. That sense of accomplishment, of achieving, of moving towards my goal, that is the tachlis. The Maral says, we say a very funny mizmar. We scream on Shabbos. Mizmar shir liyeh by Shabbos. Most people don't know what they're talking about. What do we say? B'froyach Rishoyim k'mayesev. Rishoyim, our bad instincts, they grow like grass, right? V'yotzitzu, they flourish kol payalei avin. What does it say about the tzaddik? The tzaddik grows like a tidal bound, like a date tree. A Russia grows like a grass. What does that mean? And the Navi is telling us something really powerful. He's saying, grass, I'm a developer. When you have to get a CO, you have to have ground covering. So there's something called fast grass. In 5 days it grows. You put it out there, it grows. It's worthless grass, but it looks great for the C of O. A date tree takes years, takes decades to grow. The Gemara says when you want to give a mashal for a davar shaloi b'laylam, it's dekel lepiraisav, the date tree, takes so many years to grow. So the Navi says, B'freich Rishoyim k'mayesev, they grows like grass, the bad things in our lives. The Rishoyim, they grow instantly, right away. So if there's so many and so green so quickly, it must be good? The answer is no. A wise person knows. You know what about grass? One hot day, all the fast grass is gone. It's li shamda madiyad. But the good things in our life, the things that are meaningful, right? The tzaddik, or the person that's tzaddik, it grows so slowly, so many years of learning, so many years of working on that relationship, so many years of chinuch, so many years of trying to build something of value. What could it be already? Tzaddik katamar, it grows so slow. But ke'erez balvan and yiske, it reaches so high. And whereas by the Rishoyim it says lishamda madayad, here it says shisulim beveis Hashem. So what was Yaakov's lesson about investing? The journey is the purpose. Vayu be'enav ki yamim achadim. What did he say? Michra kayayim. I want everything today. Michra kayayim b'charazchui. And what did Yaakov say? Ani esna le'iti. The wise investor in everything, investors in your Shemayim, in Torah, in Midas, in business, in relationship, knows esna le'iti. To create something of real value takes real time, real investment. But at the end, one is lishamda madiyad, just disappears with one hatei. The other one, that deep, true relationship, is adarabah shesulim b'veis Hashem. Let's go to our guest.
We have on the phone with us Rabbi Dovid Schreier, who's the head of kashrus for the OU for all restaurants and commercial facilities. Welcome, Rabbi Schreier.
Good morning.
How many restaurants do you oversee?
Between 30 and 40.
And are you makbid on having a mashgiach tmidi, yaitze v'nichnas? Like, what's the OU's policy?
The OU's policy is we require mashgiach tmidi in all food service establishments, whether it be fleishik, whether it be milchik. We don't distinguish.
Do you do any vegetarian restaurants?
No, none specific vegetarian restaurants, but obviously many of the dairy restaurants want to have a certain level of things that they can say are not milchik or fleishik.
Now, if you were to give a hechsher on a vegetarian restaurant, would you require mashgiach tmidi, or would a yaitze v'nichnas be enough?
I think we would still require mashgiach tmidi because, first of all, we would require someone to wash the vegetables. We would require someone to turn on the fires because, regardless of whether there's milchiks or fleishiks, there has to be something that's considered a olel shulchan malachim that's going to be a concern for bishul akum. You need someone to monitor what's going on. You have the concerns about the oils that are being used. Even vegetable oil can have within it, even according to the governmental guidelines, up to 2.5% of animal fat, and it still can still be called vegetable oil.
Like which vegetable oils, for example, commercial oils have animal fat in them?
I'm not sure which specific ones, but many oils are blended.
So
and once they're blended,
could you think of one that does have animal fat?
Again, I was just, I did some research as we were discussing, and I spoke to a few people, and they said that is a concern, and this is one of the concerns that if there's no person monitoring and making sure that the oil that comes in has a hechsher, then how do we know that it's kosher? If it doesn't have a hechsher, if the establishment doesn't have someone giving supervision, all the ingredients can be fine and the process can be fine, but what equipment is the food being processed on? Right? There are many. I
understand, but why wouldn't a yaitze v'nichnas? I mean, it's pretty. I can't even think of one. I mean, I haven't been to the supermarket there recently, but I mean, when you look at all the garden variety vegetables, almost every one has some type of, because it's. I would be struggle to think of a single commercial brand in the United States today that uses animal fat, and I also would struggle to say that a vegan restaurant, that vegans are makbid, like they don't eat eggs, and they don't think that they would use one of these pretty rare vegetable oils that also have animal fat, is something that they would probably lose their entire clientele.
Right, but again, that's the government also allows in vegetables, in a level that's higher than the threshold that the halacha requires bedika for there to be in vegetables, and it's still considered acceptable. So
I apologize. Are you talking about vegetables with animal fat in them, or are you?
No, vegetables with bugs in them.
Okay, so I think vegetables, honestly, a vegan restaurant would lose its clientele if they knew that they had lard in it. I mean, I have a daughter who's sort of half a vegetarian, and
right.
her hair would stand up if she heard there was animal fat. I mean, these are people they're makbid on, But let's talk about the other two. Let's talk about the other two issues.
But anything less than 2% is not going to say it on the label, and it doesn't have to say it on the label. Yeah, but if
people find out these things, it would cause a tremendous outrage. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of integrity. The vegetarians is almost considered a religion, and I think that their level of integrity is such that they would lose their entire clientele if they found out. There was recently a vegetarian cook that found out, pretty famous, that they found out that at home she eats meat and her restaurant was boycotted. So it's but let's talk about the other two issues of bugs and bishul akum. Now, so here's a question that we were asked from somebody. He says, I'm traveling in India, and there is no kosher food in India. I know this to be true. I was in India. In fact, when I was in India, I used to eat at the home of the Chabad shliach who was killed by the Muslim
Holzberg.
I ate by him many times. It was a beautiful. It was the only kosher place to eat in India. Well, he's not with us anymore. So this guy said, I'm in India, and I could eat by a vegan Jain restaurant. For those of our listeners who aren't informed, Jain is that particularly machmir on bugs, to the point is that they walk around with filters over their mouths because they believe that it's chiyuv skila to inhale a bug, like a mosquito would come into your mouth and you would kill it. They do not kill mosquitoes. So the last thing he said they would ever eat is bugs. Can I eat in that restaurant, being that there's nowhere else to eat? This was sent us. How would you, as the OU's mashgiach of 30 to 40 restaurants, overseer of the head of Kosher for restaurants, how would you respond to this gentleman?
I wouldn't recommend someone going into such a place if there's no oversight. even though there may be governmental oversight, we want to talk about the Chol Yisrael versus Chol Stam with Rav Moshe Feinstein's Atzal Heter or whatever people call it today. Right? That's not just someone who's claiming to be vegan. This is something that the government is overseeing. One can make a case that how much are they going to really be fined and how much are they going to really be affected, but that's what people can say. But here this is just the individual restaurant. In India, no one's going to start boycotting like happened to the chef who's eating meat in their house.
Well, I think by the Jains, it's part of their religious commitment not to eat bugs. So let's just go through. The vegetarians, they will not eat meat. They're highly makbid on bugs, more than we're makbid on bugs.
Right.
So to me, the Shiloh would be really about Bishalakim. And on there, the question is, well, what would you say? I'm curious, as far as Bishalakim on this. How would you react?
So any restaurant that's open for business must have something that's their signature dish. Right. Whatever their signature dish is going to be something that's going to be considered Bishalakim under the circumstances.
Why do you say that?
How else? Listen, if you're in an ice cream store, there's no Bishalakim. They're not cooking anything. But you're in a restaurant, they're cooking things. They have to be cooking something that's going to be considered Bishalakim.
I understand that. So here are the questions, okay, that this fellow, if he were a Talmud Chacham, would ask. He would say, first of all, who says that their signature dish is Oila and Shulchan Malachim? And I could tell you, as somebody who's eaten Indian food, there's a few places that have a Schreier. I don't consider any Indian food. Not only Oila Shulchan Malachim, Oila Shulchan Headlines. Okay, so first of all, who says that what they're...
The people of India do.
Okay. So the question is, in which country do you have to look at? But is it Oila and Bishul Malachim? Good point. Number two is the Mechaba brings 2 days that the Rosh says that there's no blias of Bishalakim. In other words, he's not going to eat the dish that has something that can't be eaten raw. Clearly, right? He would be eating dishes that's something that would be eaten raw, right? I would advise him, if you're eating vegetables and carrots and beans are probably not Oila Shulchan Malachim. But the question of maybe something that could be Oila Shulchan Malachim would be something, maybe you could argue that rice would be Oila Shulchan Malachim. You could argue that potatoes is Oila Shulchan Malachim. You could argue that I don't know, maybe like you would say eggplant is Oila Shulchan Malachim. Don't eat anything with those objects. What would you say to that?
Right. So the OU's position is that if something became treif through Bishalakim, the kalim are treif.
But the Shulchan Aruch brings 2 days, and the Shitas Horaah is that there's the kalim of Bishalakim, the blias of Bishalakim do not become treif. So the question is, could he be saimach on that? Let me make you a few sfeikos here. So this guy's eating a dish, and he says, can I eat this dish of carrots and beans and tomatoes and whatever, some other stuff, right? Whatever you would put into an Indian dish. So I would say like this. You have suffix of, did this kli, stam kelim eina b'nei yaiman. Suffix is, was this kli used for something else besides this particular dish? Did they also sort of cook potatoes? You don't know that. So let me go through the sfeikos.
But if you're walking to a restaurant at 7 o'clock at night, you can't make an assumption that stam kelim eina b'nei yaiman.
Well, wait. I would take the position that for sure the kli was used, but you don't need to know that it was used. You have to know that it was used for something that would treifen it up. This tomato stew big pot. There's a very good argument to say, well, today they did not use it for something else. This is what they use it for. So you have a suffix, right? So you have a suffix of eina b'nei yaiman. You have the shita of the Rosh that says that there is no bishalakim, that blias of bishalakim do not asa the kli, and you have a third suffix that you have a shita in the achrayim, and it's not a majority, but there is such a shita, that in a restaurant there is no bishalakim, because the whole concept of bishalakim is in a private home, because of kiruv hadas you'll have with the cooker, because of whatever, you become very friendly, etc., which you do not have in the restaurant. And there's many achrayim, even though again it's minority opinion, but there are many who hold that in a Bais Charoshos you don't have that.
I don't think a restaurant is considered a Bais Charoshos.
Well, it's not a home. The purpose they say that in a home, if you go to somebody's home and they cook for you, it creates a certain ambiance. Well, when you go to a restaurant, you never meet the chef. There's no kiruv hadas with the chef. So I have 3 sfeikos why this should be mutter, and it's all sfeikos drabanan. Because even if it is Bishalakam, it's Xeru, how would you respond to a Sveka for this fellow in India?
I think the last time I checked, we're not ones to make Svekas ourselves. That's the first answer. The second answer is...
What does that mean? What does that mean you don't make Svekas yourself?
We can't just create a Sveka if it's not brought in the... Brought by the poskim.
But the poskim bring each one of these things. There's a disagreement.
But each one has been poskim against what the suffix you're bringing up.
Well, some have poskim, some haven't poskim. For example, the 2 days in the Mechaba, there are poskim that are machmer, there are poskim that aren't matir. The suffix of Ein B'nei Yaiman is a suffix that the Shulchan Aruch brings. The suffix of, you also have a fourth suffix of Bittul B'Raiv. Right. So you could have a suffix of nice and tam. Well, nice and tam in a restaurant would be hard to make the argument of a vegetarian restaurant. But bittul b'raiv, you have another suffix.
We might argue that everything in a vegetarian restaurant is nice and tam l'fgam. But that's a different.
No, let's take nice and tam l'fgam. So I'm giving you 4 svekas. I'm giving you bittul b'raiv. I'm giving you the fact that there's no blias one day. I'm giving you the fact that there's another suffix of Ein B'nei Yaiman, and I'm giving you the shita that holds a base charashis. I'm giving you 4 sniffs. 3 of them are genuine svekas. 1 is a sniff to be mater drabanan. Why wouldn't you do it?
Right. So first of all, your Ein B'nei Yaiman. We said you can't use a suffix when in front of you. It's not a suffix.
It is, because it's not a question of Ein B'nei Yaiman were they used. The question is, were they used for a davar aser? You don't know that it was used for a davar aser in a meyay slays. Maybe they didn't cook rice or potatoes in this. Maybe they only cooked the vegetable, the zucchini, and the carrots in this.
I don't see that as a suffix. Yeah.
Okay.
Listen, every Rav.
No. I want. Hello, I'm not. Walk me through. How would you, as the OU, how would you?
The OU would if someone would call the OU and ask, we would not recommend that they go to such a place.
And just walk me through. How would you deal with it? You say. Just walk me through the svekas, so you could say this reason the Ein B'nei Yaiman you would not agree with because
you asked me. I gave you 3 reasons. One was the oil, one was the vegetables, and one was the bishalakum. We haven't solved any of them.
Well, bishalakum, I'm telling you, there's 2 days in the Mechaba. There's a day of Beis Charashis.
But the day in the Mechaba also
you don't know that there's
and you have to have a hand in the cooking.
And you don't have and it could be Ein B'nei Yaiman on the blias. Those are the 3 answers to bishalakum.
Okay, so I don't see that as answers.
Okay. Now, I know that there are people who give hechsherim on vegetarian restaurants in the city, and they believe that yaitza v'nichnas is enough, and they do it based upon they say there's a fear factor by yaitza, and therefore they go in once or twice a year. What's the OU's policy about mirsis and how often do you have to go in?
So the OU won't give a hechsher to a restaurant, a food service establishment that's open on Shabbos for business. So it would be very hard for us to give an answer because I think almost every one of these vegetarian restaurants in question, no matter who's giving the supervision, is open on Shabbos. So it would be hard for us to answer because we wouldn't even entertain the possibility of giving the supervision if it's open on Shabbos.
Can we talk about that for a minute? Because I don't believe a lot of people are aware of the shilos involved. We would both agree that midine kashrus, it's very unlikely that because the place is open on Shabbos, it creates a kashrus issue. But the OU, and I believe rightfully so, will not, not that my opinion matters, would not give a hechsher. Could you explain to our audience why?
Well, you clearly stated in your question that the reason that someone else is giving a hechsher based on Yotze v'Nichnas is that there's a certain level of mirsas. If you're giving a hechsher to a restaurant and there's absolutely no way that you can walk in between this Friday, between 4 o'clock this Friday and 6 o'clock on Motzei Shabbos, so how many times does Klal Yisrael have to deal with issues in restaurants when the mirsas is taken away?
So let me respond to that. That you have many paiskim, and it's angenommen lahalacha, hold that you can be a hashgacha on Shabbos, and I'll give you some examples. Cows have to be milked every day.
Right.
In all the Chalav Yisrael dairies where they have there are braish. There's many places.
I'm talking about a restaurant and a caterer. I'm not talking about a factory. I'm talking about a restaurant.
You can send the mashgiach on Shabbos technically.
Right. So in some of the local communities where they have certain establishments like a Dunkin' Donuts or something that might be open on Shabbos, some of the local vadim actually have someone kiseder walking in every single Shabbos, so they know that someone can come in on Shabbos.
But so why wouldn't the OU do that?
Because the OU has a Masorah from Rav Soloveitchik, Zatzal, that we do not give hashgacha to places that are retail places that are open on Shabbos.
And what's the underlying reason?
Because inevitably you're going to involve yourself with Jewish partners, and there are going to be issues with mechiras for Shabbos, which the Rav was vehemently against.
Okay.
And also it's going to lead to a zilzul Shabbos.
In other words, you're saying, so perhaps let me clarify it. Tell me if you would agree with this, that the Chalav Yisrael dairies that do send a mashgiach out who works on Shabbos, it's because there is no choice. You can't not milk cows on Shabbos. It has a din of tzar b'lachayim. The Shulchan Aruch already says the Paiskim say you're allowed amir la'akum because it's tzar b'lachayim. So there is no other choice. Whereas so it is a b'di'evid, but we have no choice. Whereas in a restaurant, even though we can send them in on Shabbos halachically, being that it's not a lechatchila, it's a zilzul Shabbos, and the OU would not put their hands on something that's a zilzul Shabbos. Am I saying that correctly?
I can't answer about the Chalav Yisrael because I'm not in a. I don't deal with the Chalav Yisrael farm, so I can't answer that part of the question. But I can say that the OU will not give hashgacha to a place that's open on Shabbos, and most of the major hashgachos won't either.
Okay. So in general, the hachsherim that are given where the person comes in once or twice a year, I think the OU's position is that certainly the mirsis level as such is that you have to be very suspect as to whether it's really kosher. Is that what you would say?
That would sound correct, yes.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Dov Schreier, the head of Kashrus for the commercial and restaurant division of the OU. It's been an honor to have you with us.
Hey, thank you very much. Have a good day.
Bye-bye. We have on the phone with us from New Jersey, Rabbi Zev Schwarcz. Rabbi Schwarcz is the president of the IKC, the International Kashrus Council. He learned in Telz and has smicha from Rabbi Chaim Stein. He was a Rebbe in Yavne. He was a Talmud of Rabbi David Soloveitchik. Welcome, Rabbi Schwarcz.
Thank you so much.
So, Rabbi Schwarcz, we're doing a program, and part of it is about vegetarian restaurants. And the question is, do vegetarian restaurants, totally vegan restaurants, need a hechsher? And what precipitated this, what type of a hechsher they need. And what precipitated this was something from a query from somebody who was traveling in India, and he wanted to know whether he could eat in a Jain restaurant run by Jains, which was totally vegan. They're incredibly makbid on bugs because they even wear masks not to inhale bugs. And he wanted to know, b'shas hatzchak, there is no kosher food in India, could he eat there? And that's sort of what precipitated this. And I heard that you give a hechsher on many vegetarian restaurants. We figured we would talk to you. Could you give us your experience in this area?
Okay. First of all, there's a big difference between vegetarian and vegan, right? Vegetarian means that they could have
go ahead. Yeah.
No milk, no dairy. So, I mean, vegetarian could have cheese, could have honey, and then there's different types. Everything has to have a darga. So you can be a vegetarian, eat eggs. You can be a vegetarian, eat, whatever. But vegan means that there's no meat, no dairy, no fish, basically no honey, no animal products at all. So to answer the question, however, there still is a couple of things that for vegan it would be considered vegan, but would not be considered kosher. And I am never a proponent of going into a vegan restaurant without hashgacha. And I think it's a big kilkul that people think that they could. And I think that what needs to be done is to go to some of the vegan restaurants which have a possibility of being kosher and doing it so that the kilkul is not there. First of all grape products, which is grape juice, vinegars, wines, can be considered vegan, and of course, we know they're not necessarily considered kosher. The other thing is that besides for jade you mentioned, in general, vegan, they're not makbid on kalim. They're not makbid on kalim. They're makbid on ingredients very much, bugs and all that stuff, but they're not necessarily makbid on kalim. So they would, for instance, buy used equipment that may have been used for stuff that's not kosher, and then not need to kosher it before they start using it. They also may share equipment. There's a lot of places nowadays that have small little cooking rooms where there's like a different people have their startup companies, and they share equipment. Someone who's vegan could use equipment of a company that's not necessarily kosher. So that's another issue. So it really needs to be carefully checked out. Now, is it easier to maintain and make sure? For sure. But it needs to be checked out 100%.
Okay, so let me just go back to these two things. When you say they could share equipment, that's maybe if you're buying it from a street vendor, but somebody's going into like a large restaurant. I think it's highly unlikely that they're running from one restaurant the pot to the other restaurant. Would you agree with that?
Oh, no, of course, yeah. No, 100%. I was referring more to, let's say, finished retail products you buy in the store. You said, it says vegan on it. It says no ingredients there's no vinegar in there.
It could be from a small vendor, you think?
Yeah. Yes, and there are such vendors
Okay, I agree with that. Now let me ask you. You talk about they buy old equipment. I mean, you would have certainly the din of stam kelim and b'nayamin in that case, wouldn't you?
Yes, you would. So I mean, b'diavad, it would be first of all the bite is not dirty. It's 100% clean. It's very, very clean. So it's probably even better than just stam kelim. It's probably even almost kosher. But I'm just saying, for the restaurants, perhaps. It's a little bit better.
So what would you tell that guy in India? Could he or could he not eat in the Jain restaurant something that there's no Shiloh b'shalakim on, like just cooked vegetables in the Jain place? Could he tell him he could eat there or not? It's certainly a shas hatzak, I would say.
Yeah. So I would say like this. I mean, I myself have traveled, in countries like Thailand where they have a Jain. And the Jain has dafka makbid on kelim also. But again, it's like anything else. You have to know the place, and you need to go in and ask them if you can take a look around and see how they do things. Otherwise, I would say it's not possible. In other words, if a person knows a little bit about what he's doing, and he can go in and can see, because yes, with the jade, it's very possible, especially in India, for instance, you have restaurants that serve, they call vegan, but they also have meat in the same place, right?
Right.
So,
well, the Jains certainly don't. I understand.
But I know I've seen restaurants in Thailand where. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay.
I've seen restaurants in Thailand.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to say I had restaurants in Thailand which were Jain restaurants, and they actually served, both kosher and non-kosher in the same restaurant. They just had separate kelim for the Jain stuff. So you have to know.
Rabbi. Yeah, what do you deal with bishul akum? How do you deal with that?
So our sheet of bishul akum is as follows: that when it comes to vegan restaurants, 95% of all the products are nechel v'shuchai. They're all edible raw, so there's no problem of bishul akum. Now, the few things that are not, there are a few things: beans, including all legumes with lentils and stuff like that, potatoes and rice, which are not necessarily edible raw. And for those, we rely on that terim that it's considered not olah shulchan malachim. But we're very straight up about it, and people know, because there are many people who are a little bit more machbir when it comes to those things. The Hasidish for sure machbir when it comes to beans. And the OU and the OK and all those companies will allow for canned beans. It's not bishul Yisrael, but others don't. So
can I ask you a question, just from a practical point of view?
Sure.
I've been a guest at the White House. On a number of occasions, and I was served potatoes. They brought in a kosher caterer, and they served potatoes. They had pretty much a mimic. They mimicked the kosher meal, the non-kosher meal, and so I would make the argument that potatoes are eaten by state dinners. I could be made they ate in the White House. How could you take the position that it's not a shulchan malachim?
No, so I'm saying, but the Bais, these are things which were discussed already for many years before. So I'm not making anything up. I mean, there are different dargahs. There are people. Listen, you can buy the frozen potatoes that are already cooked, that are not Bishul Yisrael, like the tater tots and things like that. You just warm them up, but they're already cooked, and it's not considered a problem of Bishul Yisrael. So when it comes to potatoes, people look at it.
But Rabbi Schwartz, once you cook it up, it's like kilu zarak beinarga. It's already a ma'isa Yisrael. So even if it was pre-cooked, but by doing a ma'isa, you could be like Rav Rishainim. You could turn it into Bishul Yisrael. But
of course,
I'm saying, how could we take the position? But how could one take the position that potatoes are not oil shulchan malachim when they clearly are oil shulchan malachim?
No, so again, it depends. There are many people that hold that first of all, French fries are not considered oil shulchan malachim. So French fries, you could have, but some people say, but if the particular product is in some forms not oil shulchan malachim, then it can be considered not oil shulchan malachim in all forms. Other people hold there is shittas that hold that any side dish is not considered oil shulchan malachim because it means that you don't serve the side dish by itself. So if you have just the side dish by itself, the potatoes by itself, that's not how a meal is served. That's not how a meal is served. So that means that I'm not saying that these are necessarily the most makubal shittas when it comes to things like that. But I'm
saying, like, who opines that side dishes never become oil shulchan malachim? I didn't find the sheet. I'm curious. Who is that?
No, I have to look into it. I don't remember offhand, but I remember discussing it with some of the Rabbanim in the very, very beginning when they first started with these.
Because I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
The Gemara says that beets are called oil shulchan. I mean, that's clearly a side dish. Nobody's going to invite you. Can you come over for dinner to have beets? I mean, these are clearly cases where these are side dishes and they have a din of oil shulchan malachim. I mean, there's not too many cases that are discussed, but shlukas are discussed, and that's. I mean, meat is the main dish, but shlukas are not a main dish, and the Gemara says there would be a problem with oil shulchan malachim.
I understand, but I think
so bottom line is, so you're not basically the position is that you're not makbid on Bishul Yisrael because of the shita that it's potatoes or rice or eggplant, etc., would all be considered side dishes.
Would all be considered? No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. With certain forms of potatoes, perhaps, but in general, French fries and all those things are clearly not considered oil shulchan malachim.
Well, French fries would not be oil shulchan malachim, but the problem is if they also cook potatoes in the restaurant, and that is oil shulchan malachim. So even the person may order potatoes, and even if they don't order potatoes, the kalim become asa because of the blias of the.
No, I understand, but the kalim would not be asa mitam chumra. In other words, if there are, because if it's clearly 100% ola shulchan malachim, yes, then the kalim will be asa. But if they're terim, then mitam chumra, you would not asa the kalim.
So you're saying that your opinion is that even regular. So I'm saying your opinion is that regular rice and regular potatoes are not oil shulchan malachim.
Well, I'm not the only one with the rice. Rice is a whole different story. First of all, there are many places they hold that sushi, for example, the sushi rice does not have to be considered Bishul Yisrael. The OU itself was such an opinion for.
Rabbi, could you cite any opinion that would hold that plain potatoes are not oil shulchan malachim? Not French fries, but like the mashed potatoes, something like that. Regular, not where it's eaten like for a sports or something, like in a modern finger, but that would be served in a meal, like they would serve steak and mashed potatoes. Is there any opinion that holds that not oil shulchan malachim? I'm just not an expert in this area.
Yeah, no, I understand. To have exactly right offhand the exact opinion, I don't have it in front of me. No, I'm sorry. I would be able to look into it, and I would be able to find that for you. But at this point, right now, I don't have it on the tip of my fingers. I apologize for that.
And what do you do? What do you do, Rabbi Schwartz, about bugs? What do you do about bugs? Restaurants that by the Jains, they're so crazy about bugs that they're the most crazy people. They walk around with masks not to inhale bugs, but your average vegan restaurant, what do they do about bugs? I don't think that particularly it's hashgacha by them.
Well, it is. It is. First of all, it is a big competitor by that, number one, and number two, we have procedures in place to make sure that the places are checking for bugs and that they have followed the procedures that we want them to do. So the truth is, number one, there's a clear with the vegan places, always they're washing the vegetables and checking them for bugs. Now they may not do it the way I exactly want them to, and we ask them to very often to add certain things to the process to make sure that it fits the way we want it. But I myself have not been into a vegan restaurant that did not at all wash bugs. I've been to caterers, doing hashgacha for caterers that were not vegan, that did not wash some of the vegetables. The promise to put it right on the plate. Some of the cilantros and stuff like that. That I've seen. But in the vegan restaurants, I've never seen where they wouldn't wash and check, and at least 2 times wash, rinse, wash again, and rinse again. Now, what we ask them to do, though, is one of a few things. First of all, we ask them that, and many of them are already doing it anyway, but that they should wash it at least 3 times. In other words, wash it, shake the stuff in the vegetables in the water, take out the vegetables, check the water, and then do that 3 times. And also to put into the water things like either salt, vinegar, or the cleaning solutions that they have for vegetables. Most of the places that we've been to already have been using the vegetable cleaning solution without us even asking them to do it. But to be fair, they were only doing it 2 times the most, and we asked them to do 3. And when we tell them that this is something which is going to make sure more clearer that you won't have bugs, they're more than happy to comply because they don't want to do it either. They're actually the true vegan places are very Hamachshir.
What do you do, Rabbi Schwarcz? Are you do you have mashgiach tmidi? Like, what's your hashgacha policy?
Okay, so we don't have hashgacha tmidis. First of all, in halacha there's no such thing as, it doesn't say anywhere. There's no provision whatsoever in halacha for hashgacha tmidis. That's a completely made up thing.
So you sign on yaitzav and nechnas. Well,
that's what it says in Shulchan Aruch. So it's definitely sign on that.
Right.
Yes.
And how
and the truth is, between me and you, most of the big scandals that took place in places in recent years that had hashgacha tmidis, and they were very, with very firm owners, etc., all that kind of stuff. So if the thing is, however, that we have to make sure that there is a mirsus and there is a yotz v'nichnas. Obviously, if they know you're not coming once every 2 months and there's no mirsus, and it's not yotz v'nichnas. So obviously, they have to expect that you can come at any time. And so we generally go to our vegan restaurants once a week, sometimes twice a week, sometimes every 10 days. We kind of mix it up a bit. And the other thing is that the vegan restaurants, there's very little of anything that can go wrong, right? We put in place for them the particular procedures for cleaning the bugs. And when Mashgiach comes, he has to see that they're doing it. And it's not something they can suddenly, they hear the Mashgiach is there, they can suddenly start doing it the right way. They're not doing it the right way, they're not doing it the right way. And so we can see that right away. And so, we feel when it comes to those things to come between 5 to 10 days, it's not a problem. And
so, Rabbi Schwarcz, and what do you see? I see that many of the restaurants you get hashgacha to are open on Shabbos.
Right.
So my first question would be yeah.
No, so first of all, if it's owned by a non-Jew, it's definitely not a problem if it's open Shabbos. That's for sure, right?
Well, the only problem would be is do your mashgichim go on Shabbos?
So, first of all, there's a couple of things. Number one, in the very beginning, I used to tell my mashgichim to go in on Shabbos. People told me that it may be an Indian of Marasayan. So some Rabbanim told me that it's possible it's an Indian of Marasayan. So I don't go as often on Shabbos. However, they have absolutely no idea that someone cannot come on Shabbos, because our places are actually in the middle of neighborhoods where our mashgichim could come in on Shabbos. So we never tell them no one's going to come in on Shabbos. But besides that, there's not a problem. I mean, the
Schwarcz,
OU and all the others.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would just say that the Gemara in Baba Kama says that even the Schreier could tell the difference between Shabbos and not Shabbos, even an ox. And I have to assume that the proprietors of
that's a Jewish-owned ox
are at least as smart as an ox.
That's a Jewish-owned ox.
Yeah,
that's the ox.
The begadim are different on Shabbos because the begadim are different on Shabbos. The hug is different on Shabbos. So, wouldn't you assume that the owner of a restaurant will be savvy enough as an ox to figure out that the mashgiach doesn't come on Shabbos?
Well, first of all, I told you that it's a Jewish-owned ox. It's an ox in the Jewish house that can understand that it's Shabbos. A goy that's sitting there doesn't necessarily have the understanding so much that Shabbos not Shabbos, in my experiences in general.
Now, Rabbi Schwartz, what about some of your restaurants serve non-kosher wine? How do you deal with that?
Okay, so the truth is, when we first came across that issue, we had spoken with a very chashuv Rav who had set up situations like that in another city, and using his advice. Who would that be? Which are Bookspan from Los Angeles, big Talmud Chacham, in a big maven in kashrus and getting kashrus. And to tell you the truth, some things he's very machmer. So I mean, he's not just a pashni. He's an Eliyasim. I mean, people know him.
But, so what do you do with serving non-kosher wine in a restaurant? How do you deal with that?
So basically, number one, the setup has to be that there is a separate bar area where the wine is, and the wine is never going to be in the area where the cooking is. Never. That's number one. Number two, the place cannot be cooking with wine. In other words, they can't say, well,
you don't allow, they can't be any dish. There's no wine ever in the food, you're saying?
Well, in other words, the same type of wine that they serve in the front can never be used in the food. Yes, 100%. For example, we have some of our restaurants that they. Yeah.
Could a different wine be? Can they cook with wine, with a different wine in the restaurant, with kosher wine in the restaurant?
They could, but again, they can only cook with kosher. They can't, for example, have a Cabernet in the front of the house that's kosher and non-kosher and cook with the kosher Cabernet. No, they can't. That they can't do. Because it's
they can never cook with Cabernet. Explain, if they want to make a recipe with wine, what kind of wine could they use?
So they generally do. For example, we have restaurants that do use wine in the cooking, and they use the big jugs of Kedem Burgundy or Chablis or things. The big jugs of Kedem wine. That's what they cook with, and they would never use the more expensive wines from the front in the cooking. Never, and they can never have any bottle, no matter what, of the non-kosher, even kosher, any wine from the front of the house. They can never have it in the kitchen. Okay, and
so what do you do with the kalim? I mean, somebody's drinking wine, non-kosher wine, and they wash the kalim together, and once things get to a restaurant, there's wine and glasses and with kalim and waiters, and what do they know about putting wine and kalim? What do you do about all that?
Well, first of all, the wine served in glass. And glass is not an issue. As far as that goes, and it's all cold. That's number one. Number two, before they wash it, they spill out the wine in the sink over there, and if there's anything left over, and wine we know is batel chad b'sheish. So I mean, even if there happens to be a lot of the sink is stuffed up, and they pour some wine, it's not an issue, and no one washes with the wine. It doesn't sit there for 24 hours. It's not hot. There's no issues of blee, and there's no issues of anything regarding the small drop of wine that may be there thrown in the sink. if it's going to be thrown on top of dishes even.
But what would happen, Rabbi Schwarcz, if the chef in the back ran out of wine, his white wines? He says, bring me a bottle quick of wine from the other. He gives a gift, and then they pour it back to the front. I mean, a mashgiach who comes in once a week or once every 10 days, is there really a mercy for something like that?
Yeah, well, first of all, as I said, the type of wine that they use in the cooking is never going to be anything similar to the type of wine that they serve in the front. There's dry white and there's dry red, and they have kosher dry white. I mean, there's different qualities in kosher dry red. I mean, you're not talking about. Of course.
So if a guy needs dry white for a fish dish, and he ran out of Chablis, which is a dry white in the back, and he says, give me some Sauvignon Blanc from the front. I mean, who's ever going to know that?
Well, first of all, I've never come to the place, and my mashgiach never come to where there wasn't tons and tons of jugs of the kosher wine sitting in the storage room, right? And they know that if it's ever going to happen, they know that they're going to lose their thing, and there's also there's no reason for them to use a more expensive wine to cook with.
Rabbi,
much more expensive.
Rabbi Headlines, would you give a hashgacha to a restaurant that served milchiks and fleishiks in two kitchens with a mashgiach that came in once every 10 days?
No.
What's the difference? Because you're afraid that they'll bring a product from one to the other. Why is that different than a bottle of wine that's by the bar?
Well, Basar B'Chalav is a completely different situation than a drop of wine that will, if they ever did it, would probably bottle anyway. Because I'm not saying that we rely on bittul, but I'm just.
But let's talk about bittul for a minute. Okay, let's talk about bittul.
Yep.
So they're putting the wine into a fish dish because they want to
have
wine plate.
I'm not.
So there's
I'm saying they're not
because it's a nice and time. What?
I'm not saying they're putting the wine in a fish dish.
The guy's making a fish. What's it called? The Madeira. See, he needs some red wines. He says, "Bring me a bottle of red. I ran out, or needed certain flavor." He puts it in. Never going to be bottled because the whole reason of the wine is because it's a nice and time.
I understand, but
cooking with it because it's a nice
assume...
and time, so there's never going to be. Let me ask you, what would be the difference between giving a hechsher between a place that has a milchiks and a fleishiger chef, which you say you wouldn't do, which makes sense without a mashgiach t'midi, to a place that has a tray for wine by the bar?
Because I know that they're not going to use that tray for wine. I know it.
So why would that be different than giving? Then why wouldn't you give a hechsher for a place that has milchiks and fleishiks in the same place when you know they won't mix the two?
First of all, I mean, when it comes to a milchiker fleishik place, there's so many different things that could possibly. We're talking about many different margarines and butters and all kinds of things that dishes, and there's a lot of stuff that can be problematic when you're talking about pots and pans, and you're talking about there's so many different things that can go wrong, that can by mistake happen. But when we're talking about the situation of this wine, where we know they're not going to cook with that wine because they are not set up for that, and they always have because they always have in stock more than enough of the kosher wine. So there's no possibility that they would actually, if I ever came and I saw they were completely out of the non-kosher wine, and it's a different story, but it never happens. Never. The mamish always have tons and tons of jugs of the kosher wine sitting there, and there's absolutely no reason for them, and it's completely no desire for them to cook with the non-kosher wine. So it's not even an assumption. It's completely. I'm completely able to say with a complete full heart and a complete conscience that they're never going to use it, even by mistake.
Okay.
Because that's how it's set up. And by the way, that's only one of the places that we certify. Most of them don't even cook with wine at all.
Well, thank you very much, Rabbi Schwarcz.
My
Good
pleasure.
Shabbos to you. Koltov. We have the honor of having with us on the phone from Eretz Yisrael, Harav Dovid Bar-Chaim, who's the head, the Rosh Yeshiva, I guess you could say, of Machon Shiloh, which is a Torah institute that is dedicated to the halachas of Eretz Yisrael, Welcome, Rav Bar-Chaim.
Shalom to you and all the listeners.
So, Rav Bar-Chaim, many Americans are sensitive towards animal cruelty, and there are many people, and in the Orthodox community, many of them who have become vegetarian. Not necessarily vegan, but vegetarian. The difference between vegan and vegetarian is they will eat eggs. Many of them eat dairy, and some of them are pescatarian. They'll eat fish, but They will not eat. They've seen the PETA videos of what goes on in a Bais hashgacha, in a slaughterhouse, and an abattoir, and they become sensitized towards the suffering of the animals. And I would like to know, what is your opinion towards vegetarianism, and is it a midas chasidus to be a vegetarian?
All right, that's a very broad question. Let's begin at the beginning. We all know that the Torah permits us to eat both vegetable type foods, things that grow on the ground, on trees, etc., seeds, grains, fruit, and also permits us to eat animals that are permitted according to the Torah. This includes fish, not all fish, many fish, and certain kinds of animals. And of course, that which comes from those animals, such as eggs, dairy products, etc. It has never been suggested. One will not find anywhere in the Talmud, in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Rambam, in Rashi, anywhere one looks, one will not find the proposition that it is improper for human beings, or specifically in our case for Jews, for religious Torah Jews, to eat meat, or to eat fish, or to eat eggs, dairy products, etc. This idea is a very new idea, and precisely as it is a new idea also in the world at large. In other words, the concept of being a vegetarian or a vegan was not known until approximately 100 or so years ago, and that's when it began slowly to become fashionable in certain circles. Over time, it percolated its way into the Jewish world and into the Torah world as well. But frankly, I must tell you that I see this as a foreign influence. Not that it is a great mitzvah necessarily to eat meat or eggs or what have you. One is not required to do so, obviously. But it is also not correct, I believe, to tell Jews that how can you do such a thing? How can you eat an animal? The animal had to be killed for this reason, etc., etc. This is not a Torah perspective. The Torah perspective is, as was mentioned explicitly to Noah in the Torah after the Mabul, that you may eat, partake from, and use all the animals, all living creatures on earth, of course, within the bounds and according to the rules of the Torah. In other words, the Torah perspective is that human beings, and in our case specifically Am Yisrael, are the focal point of the Bria, of the creation, and everything in the world is here for our use. It is to be utilized to our benefit. That is not to say that we should rape the earth as it is sometimes claimed. In other words, that we should cause unreasonable and unchecked ecological damage to the earth. We should not do so. We should be circumspect. We should behave in a rational and tempered manner in all things, and particularly when it comes to the use of natural resources. And the same is true of the animal world. We are allowed to partake of it, but it also has to be done according to halacha. This does not mean only that the animal has to be shechted according to the laws of shechita. It also means that it cannot be treated in an unduly cruel fashion. But obviously, shechita itself, one could make the claim, and I'm sure some people do, do make the claim that shechita itself is an act of cruelty, and one could not reject this claim out of hand. There is an aspect of cruelty, or even if you wanted to use the term violence, involved. But on the other hand, that is the way of the world. This is how Hashem created the world in which we find ourselves, and there was Hashem's explicit wish and instruction that human beings partake of all these things in the world, and it's entirely mutar to do so. On the other hand, if a person prefers not to do so, whether it's for ideological reasons or for health reasons, then he's not required to eat such products. But there's a difference, I believe, between adopting this position for reasons of health, diet, or some sensitivity, etc., that a person may have, as opposed to adopting it for ideological reasons. Because, as I pointed out, according to the Torah, there is no such ideology in our Torah. We do not find such an ideology, such a notion. And for a person to adopt this is in a way implying that I am on a higher level than the Torah.
So, Rabbi
Bar-Chaim, this I find somewhat disturbing.
Rabbi Bar-Chaim, let me respond with what I think a vegetarian would respond. I'm not a vegetarian, okay? But if you start at the beginning in Bereshit, where it talks about where the first tzivui to Adam, it says about food. It says L'chol chayat hasadeh, l'chol of hashamayim, l'chol rumes al aretz asher bo nefesh chaya. As kol yerek esev l'achla vayhichein. So the Ramban says on that. He says habasa lehirshu by ad b'nei nayach, right?
Right.
And the Ramban says, what's the reason? B'pnei shabale nefesh hatnua, all moving creatures. Yesh lehem k'tzat ma'ala b'nafsham. They do have some type of a soul. Yidmu ba lebale nefesh hamaskelas, similar to the human. In other words, anybody who's ever had a pet knows that the pet is, it's a cat, a dog, a fish, whatever it is. They develop a relationship, and they do have somewhat of a soul. V'yesh lehem bechira. They have choice. B'toivasam u'b'mezayneseim. V'yivrachu min hatzar v'hamisa. Right?
Yes, this is true.
So the Ramban writes that the reason why it was Nesar is because they do have a soul. Now, post-Noach, the lashon of the Gemara was Ukashabo b'nei Noach hitter lahem. It was a heter was given. I mean, we have a concept of hutra udchuya in halacha. It says hutar. So the Reb Shamshin Rafal Hirsch and the Kliyakar goes in a similar way. It says the Shamshin Rafal Hirsch says before the Mabul, the world was a world that was very lush, and from living on vegetables and fruits and plants alone, a man could survive. He said the current world, we couldn't survive without meat. So given that we had no choice but to survive, it was hutar to Noach. But it was b'di'eved, it wasn't l'chatchila. L'chatchila is like the Ramban writes, and the Kliyakar in Dvarim writes, he says, even when it was hutar l'klal Yisrael, it was ki yarchiv Hashem es kevulcha. He says basar tava, basar of lust, of enjoyment, was in the midbar was asar, only karbanis. He says, and it was given in Eretz Yisrael, but he says it was given only, dubiously. He says it's preferable. It's called basar taiva. His lashon is it's karv leprikas oil to eat basar, and I mean there are many things. The Gemara says, for example, an amoritz asur lechal basar. So Reb Chaim Vital writes in the Hagdama to the Sefer Etz Chaim, he says it's preferable only to eat basar on Shabbos. That Rizal only ate basar on Shabbos. He says haroitzel hiskadeim, somebody who wants to be mischasid should eat on Shabbos, because, like you said, eating was meant to serve God. Well, I'm not sure if somebody eats a Frankfurter at Yankee Stadium that he's doing a big avodat Hashem over there with his achilas basar, that he's being mala, the soul of the animal, to a higher degree of somebody who's eating a 6-course meal in some restaurant. So maybe by a Sudat mitzvah, maybe on Shabbat, but we see this sensitivity goes all the way back to the beginning of time, and it was hitir lahem is the lashon. So when these people say, I want to go back to Adam Harishon the way it was originally because maybe the times have changed and today they have tofu and they have various proteins that they didn't have 200 years ago, where a person could live just on protein, who couldn't live without animal, maybe we could say, today, Baruch Hashem, with, used to be 80% of people used to have to work the earth to be able to eat. Today, it's 3% of people work in farming. Maybe we've come back to a position where we could go back to before the Chet of the Mabul and say, we want to be the way it was originally intended.
All right. Well, you touched upon a number of points. Let me try and deal with at least a few of them briefly. Let us assume for a moment that everything you just said is true, that there is only one way of looking at those Pesukim, and there is only the statement of the Ramban, shall we say, and let's start on that assumption for a moment. We all know that we are not living before the Mabul. We are living after the Mabul. In fact, none of us can describe or claim to know what the world was like before that time. For a person to say, I would like to go back to the level of Adam Harishon, I would like to go back to a time of which, frankly, I know nothing, and nobody else knows anything at all about it as well. But I would like to go back to this time that I know nothing about. The one thing I think I do know about it is that we weren't supposed to eat meat at that time. I think so, and therefore I would like to do that. Well, I find that a rather strange proposition because we're not in that position. We're in a totally different reality. The world is not the same place. From everything that we do know, we can state categorically that the world is not the same place. Perhaps the physical reality also of human beings is very different today from what it was at that time. So I don't really see how one can justify the claim that we should all go back to this earlier period about which we know nothing and say, therefore, because we wish to be there, let us now do something which has not been the practice of all of humanity, essentially, and all of the Jewish people from time immemorial. So that whole approach, even if it is entirely true in terms of describing what was the original intention or what was at the beginning, I find this approach is unusual, shall we say, and not very convincing. That's number one. Number two, it's not so obvious and simple that the words of the Ramban are the only way to look at this issue. The Shadal, Shmuel David Lutzato, in his Perush on the Torah on Sefer Bereshith, he writes that it's not true that it was only at the time of Noah that we were allowed to eat meat. He bases himself on the Pasuk, which is already stated to Adam Harishon, Urdu vidrat hayam ov hashamayim. In other words, you shall rule over the fish and the birds. And he asks a very simple question. What exactly does it mean to rule over the fish? In what way does this rule or this power over them manifest itself? If you wanted to say, for example, that we rule over, we can control, we have power over animals such as cows, oxen, horses, because we can use them for our own purposes, such as riding or working, tilling the fields, or what have you. You could answer that, but that would only be a partial answer. But here we're talking about fish. No one's ever harnessed a fish to a plow, and birds equally are not beasts of burden. So what does it mean? You shall have power over the fish and over the birds. Therefore, Shadal explains that in his view, it was mutar all along to eat these animals, and later in the time of Noah, it was reformulated in such a way to make a very clear distinction, making a new start, as it were, after the Mabul, to make it very clear and unmistakably unambiguous that it is mutar to eat animals, but it is absolutely forbidden to kill another human being. when it's not justified, such as in case of war or self-defense or something of that nature. That at least is what the Shadal writes. In other words, there is more than one way of looking at the various Pesukim and other statements relating to this matter. Beyond all of this, I would. Can
I interrupt one second?
Yes, by all means. By all means.
Rashi agrees with the Ramban.
Yes, he does.
As well as Tosfos. You're straining my brain. I don't have it. Tosfos in Sanhedrin. I'm guessing it's the Testament Bais when he talks about Aver Menachai.
Yes.
Why do you have to have an Isser of Aver Menachai why is it Zion Mrs. B'nai? Why was it given it to Adam when anyway Basar was Nesar? So he says that only Basar of a Chai was Nesar, an Avela was Hutar L'Adam Arishin, Tosfos Teretzes. So right. I'm saying Rashi, Tosfos, Ramban, these are formidable lineup of Rishonim. Shadal was a Adam Gadol, I'm not saying, but if somebody says, look, according to these, really the standard Rishonim, I think that it was Usser. I think that would be sort of a real basis to lean on them. You know,
I am not questioning your claim that what you presented is the usual understanding. That is true. That is correct. I don't deny that for a moment. I'm pointing out that there is also another understanding, and it's also based on certain sources, and it also makes no small amount of sense. So I'm saying it's not the only position. That's what I'm saying. But beyond all of that, I wanted to get back to what you said about a person eating a Frankfurter at Yankee Stadium. The very fact that a person, I'm not referring to you necessarily, but people who might see this Jew, shall we say, an Orthodox Jew in Yankee Stadium eating a Frankfurter, the very fact that what disturbs them is the fact that he's eating a Frankfurter which comes from an animal, made from the meat of an animal, and rather than the fact that he's in Yankee Stadium to begin with, that I think is precisely the problem. In other words, there are so many other paramount issues. There are so many other fundamental issues, problems that the Jewish people, that the Orthodox Jews need to deal with, to think about, to be aware of. For example, how they spend their time. What do they do in their spare time? Do Orthodox Jews go to Yankee Stadium? And if so, why do they do so? Is that a proper thing for an Orthodox Jew to do? I think that's a much more serious issue. The question of how Orthodox Jews, how Torah Jews, how all Jews should spend their time, what they should find interesting and challenging and worth their time and their effort, as opposed to discussing this issue of eating the Frankfurter. So it seems to me that this is people, I think, are taking the issue of eating meat, which, as everyone agrees, all the Rishonim that you mentioned also agree that it's mutar to eat meat. No one questions this, that it's mutar. The halacha is that it is mutar to eat meat. The statement in the Gemara that an am haaretz should not eat meat is not a halachic statement. It is an agadic statement. It is not. You won't find such a statement in the Rambam or the Shulchan Aruch. Agreed? You won't. So the halacha is that it's mutar to eat meat. For people to take this issue, which is close to being a non-issue, certainly not an halachic issue, and focusing on this at the expense of so many other issues that we could discuss, such as Jewish education, such as people going off the derech and why that is happening, such as what is the purpose of being a Jew in the first place altogether? Let's ask a very simple question. What is being Jewish all about? These, I think, are much more important questions. Okay,
Rabbi Bar-Chaim, we could agree that, first of all, it doesn't have to be, I was using an extreme example, but the concept of Hamoritz lo yochel basar means when somebody's sitting in a restaurant at a social, with their wife, chatting or something, it's hard to see that they're being milad and etzoitis of the animal, which is really what the concept is of Hamoritz lo yochel basar. And I would say that it refers to probably the vast majority of meals are eaten where it's not we're sitting by a suda with a kavana to be mila. I'm bringing the animal life into the nefesh of the ruach of the adam, I mean, the vast majority of eating, people barely remember if they made a bracha afterwards. They're in such a rush going from here to there. So it's hard to imagine the concept of, it's for spiritual reasons. The reason we eat is to be milet. I struggle with that response. But I would say...
Let me interrupt you for a moment. Yeah. I am not aware of many people today in the Jewish world who would claim that whenever they eat meat, it is in order mainly or purely to be ma'aleh the nitzosot of the Baal Nefesh, the Bar-Chaim. I don't think people make such a claim. There are certain very unique, unusual individuals on a very high level who do have such a kavanah. Yes, I think so, but not many. The vast majority of Jews will never claim such a thing, and many of them never even heard of such a concept. And despite all of that, the halacha is that it is mutar to eat meat. In other words, it's not required that a person have such a kavanah to eat meat. Eating meat is an entirely legitimate practice, and the attempt of certain people or certain groups or certain streams nowadays to claim that it is illegitimate, that it is improper, that it should never happen, I take objection to that, because that is distorting the bottom line of the Torah.
I think that most vegetarians, and I don't speak to them, but I would argue that it's certainly mutar lahalacha. You see, the Shulchan Aruch is matter it. There's no doubt about it. However, it's certainly, you see from the Rishonim I mentioned that it's morally, it was a b'diavad, right? And lahalacha it's mutar. And I would compare it to something. Let me give you an example: slavery. Lahalacha, slavery is mutar, right? But
yes. As
humans, we've come to recognize that even though the Torah was matar slavery, it's a b'diavad. Before they had the engines, before they had, fuel, if you read history books, the only way to get things done was through slaves. I mean, there was just no man. You couldn't jump in your car. There were no planes, computers. So if somebody today would say, I'm going to have a slave because lahalacha it's mutar. So I bought my friend's daughter. She's 10. I bought her. She's going to clean the house for the next 2 years, and I bought a few akum as well as slaves. And I'm going to marry one to this one because lahalacha I'm allowed. I think most people today, and again I'm probably going to get criticized for this by some of my listeners, would find it morally objectionable, even though the Torah is matar it, because the Torah sets a minimum standard, not a maximum standard. The Torah is saying, this is the minimum. Yes, the halacha you're allowed to. It doesn't mean it's a preferred thing. And I would say the vegetarians would take the position. Yes, it is mutar. Basar taiva was mutar. It was hitir lahem, but it's tchuya. It's not hutra. And therefore, and I'll give you another example. The Shulchan Aruch, for example, does say in Reish Chav Gimel that if somebody buys a pair of new shoes, even though usually on a beged you would say tis chadish, tis bala, he says when you buy shoes you should not say that because a creature died because of you. And how could you say something like that when some creature died? And there were achrayim who were, the Baal Shem from Michelstadt was Yadua to be a vegetarian. Davudraham, for example, the Rishon says, I don't remember if the Torah brings it, but I know Davudraham writes, he says, why don't we make a bracha? We make borei pri hadama, blessed that you created the fruit of the earth. You created borei minim mizonot. He says, why don't we say borei basar when we eat basar? He says, because it wasn't created for that reason. We were not supposed to eat meat. We were supposed to eat vegetables and fruit and mizainis. But he doesn't bring Rav Shamshon or Fal Hirsch. He says, after the mabel was hutar. So for somebody to say, I recognize it as something that's inhumane, but it's mutar, but I would like to be makbid on it, why is that different than somebody would say, I don't want to have a slave, even though la halacha it's mutar?
I honestly do not see any room for comparison between these issues, but I think we're possibly getting off the topic. I would ask people who are so concerned about this issue of consuming meat. I would ask them, as you have quoted also, you've quoted the Ramban, you've mentioned Rashi, what do they do about the fact that it is an absolute miswat aseh min Torah to eat, for example, a korban pesach at Leila Seder. And not just the Korban Pesach, there's also the Korban Chagiga, and there are other instances during the year when we are required to do such things. What do these people have to say about such a thing?
I
never heard any cogent response to such a question. I could also mention the fact that the Rambam, with the Mem in Moreh Nevuchim, writes explicitly that the healthiest and most appropriate foods for human beings are meat and zeronim, in other words, grains, and that would also probably include kitniot, lentils, beans, things of this nature. What would, and there are also health issues. Some people can get by without eating animal products of any kind, and I myself have a good friend who is such a vegan, has been for many years. So to claim, as some claim, that it's not possible to live that way today, that's not entirely true. But it is true that it only works for some people. Some people do turn to vegetarianism or veganism, and after a period of time, months, sometimes years, they discover that it has a negative impact on their health. And this is also a well-known, well-documented medical phenomenon. So all these positions, which are rooted in an ideological position, some people have invested a lot of ideological capital in these arguments, are ignoring some basic facts of human nutrition, that many people do not get by well without eating different types of animal protein, etc. There are many doctors of many kinds of different types around the world who will confirm this. They do not take into account the fact, another fact that they should take into account, but they do not, is that the huge number of animals in the world of the type that we eat, for example, cows, sheep, goats perhaps, etc. The huge number of such animals that exist in the world exist precisely because human beings shepherd them and feed them and look after them, and eventually some of them are also slaughtered to be consumed. There would be very, very few of these animals in the world if it were not for the fact that human beings husband them, shepherd them, look after them, and this has been the case for thousands of years. In other words, the very fact that all these animals exist is because we are here and we made it so.
I've heard Rabbi
I think people are looking at this issue in a very black and white, very simplistic fashion.
Well, Rabbi, let me just respond. I think the fact that we bring them in to slaughter them, I think that if somebody raised a bunch of people with the idea of cannibals to fatten them, to be able to eat them, and then took the position, look, you wouldn't be here, and I only raised you for the purpose to eat you, I think people would find that objectionable. And so I'm not sure I necessarily agree with the argument that since we raised them, we should be able to eat them, assuming eating them according to vegetarians is morally repugnant. Now, as far as the carbon, I don't know what they would do with the carbon. I don't have a clue. I mean, so according to that, you see, my position on this is sort of, I think that the Torah's position is that to kill another creature is something very serious. I mean, there's the stories with the Baal Shem Tov when he was walking with the Chassidim and he lifted up a leaf and he saw a worm and he said the worm was hot. The Rabbi Shalom sent a leaf to shelter the worm. I think that, the Torah is full of, so I think killing another creature is something very serious, and I think that if it's done on Shabbos and Yom Tov, and it's done when a person sits down with a kavod Rosh and they say, I'm eating l'shem shamayim l'kavod Yom Tov, I think in such a case we have a smach and we say, look, this is the tachlis. Every animal wants to be, every shepsel wants to be on the Shabbos table where people are sitting and saying Divrei Torah and doing what Shabbos is, but the sort of the whimsical and, the pedestrian eating of meat, and I'm not saying that I keep to this because I don't eat that much meat, but I do eat a little, I think is something that, which is really what the Arizal says. He says, somebody who's a roitzel is skadem, I think that's the lashon of in the document. He said should eat on Shabbos. I do agree with you that now as far as it being unhealthy, I agree with you that if a person needs meat to eat, there's no suffix, he's allowed to eat it. But there's a certain gratuitous callousness that people take it as a given, that you sit down to a lunch of schnitzel or this and that I think there's a sensitivity that we see in the Torah that is maybe missing. So I'm sort of walking in the middle.
I'm sorry. I'm not. Did I hear you correctly? You said that there's a lack of sensitivity in the Torah?
No. There's a certain sensitivity that if we look at the Torah, we see a sensitivity that is missing when people eat meat gratuitously.
Well, the term, I do not understand what you mean by gratuitously. People
sit down
eat,
for a lunch,
just one moment. People must eat, and we are allowed to eat those things that the Torah permits us to eat. Now, before a person starts comparing themselves to Adam Arishon, why would a good Jew not compare himself to Avraham Avinu? Avraham Avinu saw three strangers, and he offered them hospitality. He invited them into his home, and what did he do? And Avraham ran off to the herd and took a young bullock, a young animal, and had it slaughtered, rachavatov, with good, soft, tender, tasty meat, and offered this to his guests. This is what our forefathers, starting with, not just with Abraham, but if we take the example of Abraham onwards, this is what our forefathers did. All of Am Yisrael's, all of our forefathers, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and all of the Shvatim, they were all shepherds, as they said to Paro and Mitzrayim when they were asked, "What do you do?" They said, "We are shepherds." Now you tell me, what do shepherds do? Taking this moral high ground that I am holier than thou, I am on a higher level than Yaakov Avinu, I am not on the level of Abraham, I'm much higher level. I am concerned about the shechita of chickens or cows for the purpose of human consumption. This is a big issue for me. I find this a very difficult position to swallow. I think I would also like to know whether some of the people who make these issues some of the most focal points in their lives, whether they're equally concerned about other forms of suffering and other tragedies in the world of a much greater magnitude. For example, I saw today in the news that yesterday, after six years after the event, after a bomb went off at a certain point in Jerusalem, and a 14-year-old girl who was severely injured and was in a coma for the last 6 years as a result. She passed away yesterday in hospital after her condition deteriorated over the last 2 weeks. I just asked myself the question, why is it that I don't hear these people saying anything about these events and what led to these events and who's responsible for such events, for allowing them to happen or facilitating or not preventing such things from happening? Why is it that Judaism for some people seems to have become a religion which is concerned only with the chickens and the cows? This is a distortion of the true set of values and norms that the Torah describes for us. And people here, unwittingly, I believe, are taking their cue from other ideologies which are to be found without the pale of the Torah, outside Judaism, and they have made this part of their essential being and their essential view of existence. And this is something that I personally do not find acceptable. I do not find it correct. If a person chooses not to eat meat or animal products, that's their choice. That's fine. There's no problem with that whatever. But to go on a crusade about this and to badger people about this and to go on about it ad nauseam, I think this is indefensible.
No, I don't think we were talking about badgering or going on about it ad nauseum. The question is it a midas chasidus not to eat meat? It wasn't about badgering or asking other people. Now, as far as the others eating meat, just as an aside, well, from Avram Avinu's story, which is the only time we see him eating meat, is except for karbanis, is because we learn the mitzvah of hachnasas archim from there. And the mitzvah is, yes.
And what about Yitzchak? And
by Yitzchak, the Farshim say, I don't remember who it is. It could be that it's the Netziv. He says it's the first time in his life that he ate meat was when he came to bench his sons. His sons.
Well, that's a rather difficult explanation to accept. In kol hakavod hara'ui to Rabbeinu Gadol HaNetziv Zitzal, because the pasuk states explicitly Ka'asher Ahev, as he likes, the kind of food that he likes. How did Rivka know that he likes it if he never ate it?
Well, Rabbi Bar-Chaim, it's been an honor to have you on with us. Thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure. Kol Tov.